Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Unplugged. Today I am running a single elimination tournament to crown the best horror video game ever made. 64 horror video games enter, only one will be crowned the champion. And to ensure that it's totally fair, I am randomizing them right now, and I'm not looking. I'm constantly clicking the randomize button and stop. And this is the order that we're going to run with for the entire tournament. I usually talk movies, not games, on this channel, but I do play a lot of video games, and the genre that I play the most of is definitely horror games, just because I'm a big horror fan in general, and so of course that extends to video games. I've played so many horror video games that I couldn't fit them all in this bracket. This bracket maker website that I pay for the premium version of still maxes out at 64. And I also finally figured out how to turn on the headings that tell me which rounds are which, because I never knew what they were before. And before we get started, quick reminder that you can pick up my horror novel, South of the Mason-Dixon. It's available in paperback, obviously, but also as an ebook and an audiobook narrated by some other dude. If you like my taste in horror and you want to see my take on the horror genre, pick yourself up a copy of South of the Mason-Dixon. You can even listen to it for free with an Audible free trial, or read the ebook for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited membership, or I think you can do a trial of that too. So go ahead and read it for free. I don't really care if you pay for it or not. I just want people to experience the story. But without further ado, let's start the tournament. First up is Resident Evil 6 versus Get Even. Resident Evil 6 is maybe the worst of the Resident Evil series. It's definitely one of the worst of that series. It's not good at all. The whole Resident Evil series, every entry that I've played is in here, except for the ones that I only played a little bit of, like Code Veronica X I played a little bit of, but not really enough to judge. Dead Aim I played a tiny bit of, definitely not enough to judge that one. Resident Evil 6 I've definitely played enough to judge, and I judge it harshly, I judge it poorly. But at the same time, Get Even is not a good game. Get Even is a really bizarre game. I would call it like conceptually confused. Like it doesn't even seem to know what it's attempting to do. It's a very bizarre game. It's a game that mashes up like wet work assassin stuff with a really weird type of horror that feels like it wasn't made by people who have any experience with the horror genre. It feels like they tried to make a military shooter, like a tactical military shooter, all creepy, and they didn't like know how to do it, so it's just strange. I think it still is better than Resident Evil 6, because it's at least unique. It's something different, but I don't recommend either of these. Okay, next up is The Evil Within versus Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 is much better than Resident Evil 6, but it's still far from being the best Resident Evil. I don't like hate this one like some people do. I played through the whole thing. I've also played through the whole thing co-op in the past, so I guess I played through the whole thing twice. And it was enjoyable enough, but it's definitely not the series at its best. The Evil Within, however, I really like. I think The Evil Within, this is actually an interesting matchup because Resident Evil 4 came out, and it's a lot of people's favorite in the series. It's my favorite in the series, at least. But instead of making Resident Evil 5, the guy who creative directed Resident Evil 4 left the series, and he went and made The Evil Within instead as his next game. It was like a while later, but that was his next thing. Actually, he might have worked in Resident Evil 5. I'm not like an expert on the Resident Evil series. And you can feel a lot of that DNA, but it's also refreshingly different. It's iterative. It's building upon that. It's not like doing the same thing with a new IP. It's a brand new IP that's a really interesting IP, and it does some really creative gameplay things where, like, you can knock down enemies, but to like kill them permanently, you need to light a match and burn them. And you obviously have like a limited number of matches in your inventory. Interesting things like that. Now, like a lot of these types of horror games, it gets really schlocky toward the end. Like it gets big and bombastic in a way that, strays a little too far out of like the creepy territory that excels early on. But not as bad as a lot of the Resident Evil games, for example. The Evil Within, I really like. I like the sequel even more, though, and the sequel's on this list, too. Evil Within I definitely prefer over Resident Evil 5. It's got some issues, but it's a really, really solid horror game. Okay, Dead Island versus Manhunt. Dead Island is like an okay game. I think there's a lot of dissonance between what people were expecting and what the actual game was, though. Including for myself, definitely, because it had a really great trailer, like a really effective trailer that struck a really emotional tone, and it just promised a completely different game than what was delivered. The game is such a like dumb brain, repetitive, hit the shit, lots of swearing and whatever. No character, no emotion, nothing. Versus the trailer looked like some kind of story-driven, emotional thing. The game on its own is okay. There's a certain charm to it. I kind of like the sandboxy nature of a zombie game where the zombies themselves are just kind of there. They're not like a huge threat on their own. And I'm not saying that in like a sarcastic way. I do genuinely like that because it feels like you're navigating an actual like zombie-infested world. But it gets old quickly. It gets repetitive, and the writing is just so bad. Also very buggy, and like the progression system sucks. Like the upgrades and whatnot are terrible. It's like, oh, you do 1.5% more damage. Big fucking deal. Like they're all things that you're never gonna notice. So that's kind of lame. Manhunt I really like. I did a video over on my main channel, Brickwall Pictures, because if you didn't know, this is my second channel. Over on the Brickwall Pictures channel, I have a video where I sort of pitch a Manhunt movie adaptation, and I break down why movie video game adaptations do and don't work, usually don't work. So go check out that video to hear some more thoughts on Manhunt, a little bit of analysis on the game's themes and whatnot. I really like Manhunt. I love that game. Fantastic game. Beyond it just being like controversial and super gory, I think it's doing I think it's got a lot of clever stuff under the hood, as a matter of fact. Okay, Here They Lie versus Prey. This is the new Prey by Arcane, not the older Prey that I haven't played. And from what I understand, it's like completely unrelated. Arcane was just like forced to use the title Prey because it had some vague recognition component. So the Prey that I'm talking about is an immersive sim from Arcane, who are like the modern masters of that. I know they just fucked up recently with that Redfall game, but I kind of don't think it was their fault. I think it was, the parent company, Bethesda, jamming a square peg into a round hole or whatever. Prey was phenomenal. I loved my playthrough of it. It hooked me in a way that games often struggle to. Here They Lie, on the other hand, is a complete incompetent mess. Here They Lie sucks. What I'm about to say applies to a couple games on this list, but it feels like it's made by a group of people, or at least like some people in charge, who don't understand the horror genre, who don't like the horror genre, and who think the horror genre is just a cheap and easy way to make a quick buck. That's the distinct impression I got from Here They Lie, that the people making it didn't give a shit about what they were making or the horror genre in general. They just went, horror makes money, whip up a quick horror game. It's easy to throw in some creepy music and whatever, and they're just like the laziest route possible. I have open disdain for that game. And a couple others on the list I would say that about. Okay, Silent Hill, this is the original, versus Bioshock. These are both classics at this point. Silent Hill's obviously much older. I think Bioshock is the more enjoyable game. It's less horror. Again, it's a little bit of the immersive sim genre. It's very action heavy. Versus Silent Hill is full-blooded horror, survival horror to the extreme. I think I gotta go Silent Hill when we're ranking horror games. If we're just talking like which game's more fun to play, then it's Bioshock probably. Okay, Outlast versus Cold Fear. Cold Fear was one of those Resident Evil 4 knockoffs. Like, it stole so much from that game. Like, too much, to where it's like getting into some plagiarism territory. But I think it's pretty good as for just doing the same thing again. They kind of took a lot of the right cues. It's pretty good, but it's a little janky. It lacks the refinement of Resident Evil 4, which is like no surprise. I think they cranked it out in like under a year. I think like 6 months or something they cranked this fucker out. Outlast, however, extremely polished, really intense horror game. Outlast, like if you can immerse yourself fully in Outlast, like really picture yourself in that situation, which is how I like to play horror games, It's always going to be late at night. I get the lights off. I try to go, okay, I am this character. I'm in this situation. I'm like the player that the horror game designers want every player to be. Where like, I want to be scared. That's my objective. I want to be creeped out and on edge. I'm going to create the best environment possible, like the ideal play situation, and try to get myself creeped out. That's what I'm looking for. And Outlast can do that. Outlast is really, really good. Okay, ZombieU versus Until Dawn. ZombieU, the U was for the Wii U, but I never had a Wii U. I actually played the PlayStation 4 port of it, which was still called ZombieU, even though the U now made no sense. Anyway, it's a pretty generic, bad zombie game. It's not good. However, it's still better than Until Dawn, because Until Dawn fucking sucks. I don't understand why this game was so popular. It's just non-stop red herring jump scares. It's pathetic. It's real bad. ZombieU is moving on by virtue of not being as dog shit as Until Dawn. And I know that opinion pisses people off because I've pissed people off in the past with that opinion, and I don't care. Okay, Scorn versus True Fear Forsaken Souls. I'm going to say right off the bat, True Fear Forsaken Souls is another one of those games like Here They Lie. It's a Here They Lie situation where I just get the impression that the people who made it don't like horror, don't understand horror, they thought it was cheap and easy. So Scorn's moving on. I'll talk more about Scorn in its next matchup because it's a very interesting one. Resident Evil, oh my god, are you serious? Resident Evil 4 versus Silent Hill 2. These are like two of the top dogs. This is kind of unfortunate that these two got paired up in the first round because this could easily be the final two in the head-to-head. But that's what this randomized ordering does. It makes some unfair matchups. These two are both phenomenal. These are two of the best horror games ever made. Now, there's a Silent Hill 2 remake about to come out, which I think is actually made by the people who made Until Dawn, which has me very hesitant about it. Maybe it's a different team. Maybe it's people who made The Medium or something. But whatever it was, I remember it's a studio that has not impressed me. So I'm not really hyped for the remake. The Resident Evil 4 remake was very highly praised. I have not played the remake yet, though I do have it. I'm going to play it this October. I'm waiting until October because, behind the scenes here, I'm not recording this in October. So I'm saving it. I'm saving it for me to experience in October, the remake. But the original is one of my favorite games of all time, regardless of genre. It's in my top 5, easily, of just favorite games of all time. So this is a fucking high bar for the remake. It doesn't feel like a game that needs a remake to me. But if the remake can somehow improve upon it, then I am going to be a happy camper, let me tell you. I gotta go Resident Evil 4. Silent Hill 2 is fucking incredible, though. Really creepy, really great writing and world design. Everything about it is really good. But Resident Evil 4 has my heart. Okay, Amnesia Rebirth versus the original Resident Evil. Amnesia Rebirth was the one where they're out in the desert and in caves and stuff. It didn't work for me. I didn't get all the way through this one. I played a little bit of it, and I thought they kind of jumped the shark immediately when you go to that magic world, and there's I was immediately what the fuck am I looking at? I don't want to. It lost me right off the bat. Resident Evil moves on. Oh, we got another Amnesia game. Amnesia The Bunker versus Resident Evil 2. Now this time I am counting the Resident Evil 2 remake, because I have played that remake. I've actually played through it, I guess you'd say 2.5 times. I played through it as Leon, and then I immediately played through it again as Claire, and then I played through half of it again later on, but I didn't go all the way through it that third time. It's a great remake. I had never played the original, so I can't compare them directly, I suppose, but it felt great playing that remake. Amnesia The Bunker is the latest game in that series after a bit of a hiatus. Actually, I guess the big hiatus was between 1 and 2, not between 2 and 3, not counting the spin-off DLCs or whatever. So Amnesia The Bunker is the latest Amnesia game. It kind of beat a couple other games to the punch in as far as being a horror game set in a World War I bunker, because there are 3 of them that are all coming out this year. I think 2 of them already came out, and there's another one on the way. It's weird how there were no World War I bunker horror games, and then 3 of them all at once. Very strange. So full disclosure, I have not finished The Bunker yet, but I am playing it currently, and I feel like I've played enough to have an idea of where it would rank next to Resident Evil 2. I don't think it's a very long game. I think I'm near the end of it, but I enjoy the gameplay loop. I enjoy that it's trying some immersive sim stuff, because I like that genre, and it's interesting to see that implemented in what is a full-blooded horror game rather than horror elements like Prey and Bioshock have. So I've played all of the Amnesia games, all of the mainline ones. I haven't played that Machine for Pigs thing, which I think was a DLC, but then got its own separate release or whatever. I've played all the mainline ones, the 3 main ones. The Bunker is my favorite of those 3, even though I haven't finished it yet. That being said, I do think Resident Evil 2 comes out on top. The Resident Evil 2 remake is so crisp and pristine. Really great stuff. Okay, Alien Isolation versus Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. Now the thing with Alien Isolation I think it's definitely the best of the Alien like licensed video games with the xenomorphs and all that, because a lot of those have not been great. At best, they're all like okay. Alien Isolation at least like nailed the aesthetic. It's using the xenomorph well, where like it's a creepy, intimidating entity rather than like cannon fodder, like a lot of the games use when you're playing as a colonial marine or whatever. I think this is a me problem. I am just so bad at it that I have not been able to beat this game or even make it all that far into it. I can't seem to just like make it through like the first few areas without getting killed, even by like just the human enemies. I don't know what's wrong with me that I can't beat this like simple early stages of the game, but like its particular brand of first person stealth just like does not compute in my head. I can't seem to make it through these areas. I will keep trying it. I have tried it on 3 different occasions, like years apart each time. But like maybe I'm less bad at this now, and I still cannot like make it into this game at all. So that's the full disclosure I have to do. I think it's really good, but I have seen very little of it because I just suck at it. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. I've played that entire thing. It's basically the original Red Dead Redemption got a DLC expansion, which was basically its own full game, shorter because it's a very long, the main campaign is a very long game. But Undead Nightmare is still substantial. It's hefty, it's weighty, there's a lot to it. And it's so much fun. I kind of wish they would do an Undead Nightmare for Red Dead Redemption 2 and, just kind of continue that trend. I don't know that they will, or if they will, it'll probably be a very long time because Rockstar is content to just re-release Grand Theft Auto 4 over and over again. Or Grand Theft Auto 5, rather. I mean, both of them, honestly. I mean, hell, they just re-released the first 3 in Vice City and the other one, too. Undead Nightmare, it's a little tricky to compare because it is technically like an add-on, not a full game. It's basically a full game. It's a fun, like, Western zombie game, which we don't really, it's not very trodden territory. It's kind of an unfair matchup, both because Undead Nightmare isn't its own full thing and because I suck so much at Alien Isolation that I haven't been able to experience the full thing. I mean, I guess I'll go Undead Nightmare. But, I'll keep trying Alien Isolation. I want to see the rest of it. I don't know why I'm so bad at it. Maybe I just need to use a different, the easy difficulty setting or something. I don't know. Okay, The Little Nightmares versus Five Nights at Freddy's. This is easily The Little Nightmares because Five Nights at Freddy's fucking sucks and I am baffled that it is so popular. This shit is like the antithesis of anything frightening. It's not scary or creepy in the slightest. Is it made for like children? And I don't know why there's so many of them. I don't know why they did a movie. I don't understand the popularity of this series. It is awful. It's so bad. Okay, Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles versus Dead Rising. The Umbrella Chronicles, I think they might have re-released it later on other consoles, but the version I played was on the Wii, where you use the Wii Zapper, the light gun thing, to shoot people. And as far as in that category of the rail shooters, you don't move, the game just moves around like House of the Dead style. As far as those games are concerned, it was a pretty good one. It's got a Resident Evil coat of paint. It's kind of fun or whatever. It's not scary or difficult or anything, but it's entertaining enough. Dead Rising is a very popular series. There's a lot of games in this series that only a couple of them have been really popular and successful, I think. There's way more games in the series than people seem to have enjoyed. I've only played a couple of them. I've played a little bit of 2. I've played a little bit of Frank's Big Package or Off the Record or whatever it was. Played a little bit of that, which I think was the version of 2 where it's just 2 but they swapped the main character back to the guy that people liked. But I've never played 3 or 4. I have played the original one, and the version I've played the most is actually the Wii version, because for a long time I had a Wii but not a PS3 or an Xbox 360 or anything. And the Wii version is called Chop Till You Drop, and honestly it was pretty fun. I had a lot of fun with that on the Wii. I learned later on that there's a lot of content missing from the Wii version, and your health is calculated completely differently. The Wii version I don't think gives you the whole camera mechanic, which is pretty central to the PS3, Xbox 360 version. So the Wii version is kind of neutered. It's missing a lot of stuff. It's good. It's solid. Fear 3 versus Dead Space 2. These are both sequels to games that we haven't covered the first one of yet. Fear 3 is definitely the worst of the three Fear games. I do still wish that this series continued, though, because I love those first two games. In Fear 3, I will say, I really appreciate that they made the entire campaign split-screen co-op, because I just kind of wish more games did that. I like split-screen co-op. I don't really like the whole online co-op. If I'm going to play a game with somebody, I like it to be the couch co-op kind of thing, not the whole online play. Fear 3 is still fun if you're playing in co-op. Like, the shooting still feels kind of nice. Not as good as the first two games. And the horror is just kind of a little pathetic in the third one. The attempts at horror are so ineffective this time around. The first two have a good balance of, like, killer shooting with genuinely good horror. Third one has pretty good shooting and pathetic horror, where, like, they don't know what they're doing anymore. I think it's like a completely different team. It feels like it. Dead Space 2, however, I really enjoyed. I thought it was much better than the first game. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. I do know that my opinion on Dead Space in isolation is not a popular opinion, but we'll get to that later on. Okay, Metro Exodus versus Manhunt 2. Metro Exodus is the third Metro game when they went open world. It's a little less horror-centric than the first two were. The first two they're like post-apocalyptic action games, but they have quite a bit of horror in them. Exodus has a little less, but there's definitely still some in there. Like, there are monsters to fight that are in, like, guided horror sections. The ending of the game, when you go back in the tunnels, gets horror again because it brings that claustrophobic element back in. I really wanted to like Exodus more than I did. I found it pretty buggy. Maybe that's been patched, though. I also found it, like, just a little too slow. Like, I liked the methodical exploration, but I didn't like how slow your character moved paired with how, like, twitchy and fast you're expected to move in the action parts. At the same time, I really liked those first two areas, the, like, open worldy areas. I didn't like the more scripted sequences, which is strange because the more scripted sequences worked really well in those first two games. Manhunt 2, I really like. It's a very different game than Manhunt 1, which I think is a good thing. I really respect how it's, like, completely different. They dropped the whole, like, you're on a snuff game show kind of angle. Not game show, like reality show. But they replaced that with a narrative that I find genuinely interesting and involving and engrossing. The whole, like, Pikmin project and the two protagonists and all that. I like the characters. I think there's some really solid voice acting in there. Good storytelling. Gory as all fuck. The filters are a little annoying, like the strobing lights and stuff. It's a little excessive. They're trying to obscure the violence because they kept getting banned places. And by the way, it's more obscured on certain platforms. This is one that I played on the PS2, but there is a Wii version, and the Wii version obscures the violence, like, even more, to the point where you can't even, like, tell what's happening sometimes. I like Manhunt 2 a lot. I really like the two Manhunt games, and I would love for Rockstar to go back and make a third one. I don't know if that will ever happen. Probably not. Maybe in, like, a decade. But I love those first two games. And it's moving on. Okay, that's the first half of the bracket, but we have a whole second half of the bracket. Okay, Outlast 2 versus Amnesia, The Dark Descent. Now, from the little bit of discourse that I've been privy to, it seems like everybody loves the first Outlast, and a lot of people do not at all like Outlast 2, or they at least think it's much like inferior to the first one. I don't really think that's true. I like the second Outlast a whole lot. I think I like it even more. I found it creepier. I found the kind of, like, open level design, while it does lead to you getting lost more, which is a complaint that I saw. I kind of think that's good in a horror game, because it leads to these chases where you're being followed and you're like, oh fuck, I don't know where to go, and you have to, like, search around for it. I liked the fact that you could be, like, in a corn maze and have 360 degrees to go, and you're like, I don't know where the fuck I'm going, and every, like, little inch that I move is danger. I found that really intense. Again, like, I'm really being like, I am in this cornfield. Like, I'm not, like, playing a video game and I'm like, oh, I'm not scared or whatever. I'm like, I'm in a cornfield. There are scary rednecks all around me. What am I going to do? Like, I really try to get in the situation. And Outlast 2 is tense as fuck from that POV. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's a good, creepy time. Amnesia, The Dark Descent, however, I didn't find creepy at all. Again, I try to engross myself in that one, and I can't do it. Part of it is the monsters look so fucking goofy. They don't look scary at all. They look so dumb. It's supposed to be like, oh, you can't look at them. They're so goofy looking. And the way that like the encounters are orchestrated, like it all just felt so phony and artificial. Amnesia: The Dark Descent, I guess it's like a classic. Maybe if I played it right when it came out, I would have liked it, but I don't know. I wasn't able to get engrossed in it at all. Played through the whole thing, story I didn't find engrossing either. I didn't think it was like poorly written, but I feel like they weren't going for too much other than, explore around and light the candles and stuff. I like the sanity stuff. There's good stuff in there. It didn't really work for me. Outlast, however, works for me really well. Okay, Metro 2033 versus House of the Dead. This is an easy one. Metro 2033 is moving on. House of the Dead, as I mentioned earlier, it's one of those light gun rail shooters where it moves around and shoots zombies. They're fun. They're like an arcade staple. There are home versions as well. Like you could play it on the Wii or play it with like one of those light gun attachments if you had like the PlayStation Move or whatever the fuck. The House of the Dead games are fun, but they're not like effectively creepy. And they're also like, they're designed to suck quarters out of your pockets in the arcade. And when they translate it to home games too, they don't really like compensate for that. So it's a lot of just like brute forcing your way through it or repetition over and over again, kind of like unfair challenge stuff to suck your quarters away, Dying Light 2 versus Resident Evil 7. I enjoyed the first Dying Light a whole lot. I was pretty excited for Dying Light 2. I bought it pretty close to when it came out, and it was just a horribly unfinished mess. This game was not ready to release. Like Cyberpunk 2077 levels of unfinished, I thought. I guess some people had like better luck and it was less glitchy for them. For me, this thing was like completely unplayable. Characters would start talking, like an NPC would be giving you a mission, and they'd play the first couple words of their dialogue, and then all the audio would cut out. And their mouth would keep moving, and like if I had the subtitles on, they would show up, but the rest of the dialogue wouldn't play. Or like half the people in the world, they would have no texture mapping. They would just be gray like blobs. Anytime I would try to run, my character would like go into like slow motion, like chugging frame rate, but also like moving slowly. So in any of the chase scenes, I like would just like insta fail because my character wouldn't move the speed he's supposed to. Shit like that, like just horribly game breaking stuff. So I set the game down. I came back to it like half a year later, still broken. There were these like huge patches and stuff, like big update files. They didn't fix it. Didn't work. Now I will say I was playing that on the PS4. That was before I had. Now I have an Xbox Series X. I'm sure it runs better on modern tech, but the version I bought it for was the PlayStation 4, which cannot handle this game, and they did not patch it correctly. They just released a broken, unplayable game, and fuck you for doing that. Like, I don't know how so many studios and developers do that and think that's fine and think that's okay. It's not okay. Resident Evil 7 is moving on. Okay, Resident Evil 8 versus PT. PT is worth highlighting because it's phenomenal, but it also doesn't really have a shot of moving on unless it was up against something like Dying Light 2. It's going to be Resident Evil 8 here because PT is just a demo. The PT stands for playable teaser, I think. But it's worth highlighting because it's genuinely phenomenal, and it's for a game that doesn't exist because Konami fucking sucks. Their corporate hierarchy is full of assholes. This was the game that Hideo Kojima was making with the help of Guillermo del Toro. I don't know how involved del Toro was, but he was in there. So before Kojima had Death Stranding out, he was going to make this PT game, which I think would have been better than Death Stranding. Death Stranding's fine, it's good, but it's not really a horror game. There's horror elements to it, but I don't know. I would prefer to say full-blooded horror game, but that's just where my preferences lie. This PT demo, if you were lucky enough to play it while it was out, which I was, it was excellent. And if you weren't, watch like one of those Let's Plays on YouTube or whatever, because it's worth seeing. It was really good. It was really creative, fascinating stuff. The puzzles were kind of bullshit. A couple of the later puzzles, it was like, there was really like no way for people to like actually solve, which was stupid, but the scares were really well done, really, creatively assembled. Resident Evil 8's moving on, though, because it's a full game. And I see we have 7 and 8 up next, which will be a fun one to break down. Okay, Resident Evil 3 versus House of the Dead Overkill. Again, I'm going with the remake. I just, yesterday, finished the Resident Evil 3 remake right before I put this bracket together. And I found it to be a huge disappointment after really loving the Resident Evil 2 remake. They cranked this thing out so fast, there's like missing content from what I've understood. Again, I haven't played the original version of 3, but I've like, looked into what was cut from the game, and it's a lot of cut material. And also, like, so much is just rehashed from 2, it feels like DLC, right? Like, they even reused the whole police station setting. And as I was playing it, I was like, this could be cool to re-experience the same location from a new perspective. But in practice, it just feels lazy. It feels like they're just reusing the locations that they already built, like saving themselves a bunch of work, Nemesis sucked. I don't know if he was better in the original, but he's not scary in the slightest. He's pretty much only in scripted chase sequences, which like play themselves, or in these big boss fights that are stupidly easy and not scary at all, but they take forever because he's just a big bullet sponge. They're just tedious, and the bits in between aren't that good either. I didn't like the remake. House of the Dead Overkill is going to move on, and I'll talk about that one more in this next matchup. Okay, Hello Neighbor versus Resident Evil Revelations 2. I'm not going to mince words here. Revelations 2 is moving on, not because it's great, but because Hello Neighbor fucking sucks. I can't believe how popular this game is. It is insane to me that this game is like extremely popular, has a really large like presence online, like lots of, people doing reactions to it and whatever. Those people who are reacting to this and acting like it's actually scary are such fakers. It's so phony. They're just pretending to be scared because, that's like, you scream on stream and the young audiences like it, I guess. I don't understand that world. This game sucks, and I can't believe that it was successful enough for a sequel and has such a big fan base. It is terrible. It plays terribly. It is not scary in the slightest. Honestly, when I played this game, I had just heard Hello Neighbor and then I was getting a sequel and stuff. I didn't even know it was supposed to be a horror game. And I didn't clock that it was meant to be a horror game until I uninstalled it, like, this game sucks, and then saw online after the fact that it's really popular and that it's apparently a horror game. Like, it doesn't even read like a horror game. It's that far away from even approximating something creepy or scary or atmospheric or anything. It's terrible, awful. And it looks so fucking bad, too. Like, I'm not just criticizing, like, the graphics or whatever. I'm criticizing, like, the character models. That kid in the opening cutscene, like, your player character, is, like, the most ugly designed character I've seen in a long-ass time. Okay, Darkwood versus Friday the 13th. So Darkwood is an indie game. It's a top-down survival horror game. I've played a few of these, like, pixel art horror games where it's, like, a side-scroller or a top-down game. And I would say that the deck is kind of stacked against them in those instances because, I don't know, it seems really difficult to be frightening in that kind of presentation style. Like, there are a whole bunch of, like, side-scrolling horror games that I played and top-down horror games where, like, I feel like, I admire what they're attempting, and I think there's some good stuff there, but just that format can't be creepy to me. That's what I thought. Darkwood proved me wrong because this game is creepy, like, effectively creepy. There's some, like, grotesque stuff in there that just like comes out of nowhere and surprises you. It's got a really great tense and engaging gameplay loop where like at night you have to like barricade yourself in the house and the house gets attacked by whatever, and then during the day, which is still like dark and creepy, you have to go out and gather resources and make it back to your house in time. It's good and tense. Now that loop gets a little repetitive and tiring after a while because the attacks at night aren't always super engaging. It's the kind of thing where like you need to be in the house, otherwise you're like guaranteed to die and you can't see anything. If you get back a little late, you can be like rush back, but it's not like optional. It's not like you can, last through the night if you have enough weapons or whatever. It's not that kind of game. And the intention is good here, but it becomes a problem when the nights last a pretty long time, and a lot of that time is like you can just set the controller down and you just have to wait, basically. And the part about it that I admire the intentions of is they don't want it to be too repetitive. Because sometimes you'll get through like a whole night and there won't be any attack. Or there'll only be like ghosts pushing some furniture around or whatever, right? It's not like they're going for variety and to keep it from getting stale, because like so you don't know what to expect. But the thing is, it's either a big attack or it's like nothing happening. In either way, it takes a very long time, and most of that time is spent like waiting for whatever scripted event is going to happen, or whatever randomized event is going to happen. It's a lot of just waiting. And after a few nights, after a few day cycles of it, it gets a little old. Even the attacks, they're a little more predictable, or they're just less intense. But the world is still really intense to explore. There's an image where you go into this farm, and there's a silo, and there's this giant pig with these spindly little legs, and it's so creepy. And the noises it makes and the way it moves, great animation from a top-down pixel art kind of style, really impressive stuff, and fantastic sound design. The sound design is killer. Darkwood really impressed me. It's got to move on here. It's I think the only top-down pixel art style horror game that has effectively been creepy, I think. Everything else has kind of come up short for me. There might be other good ones out there, and other good horror side scrollers. I still don't think I've ever played a side scroller horror game that I found effectively creepy. And I've played quite a few that attempted that and didn't get there. The Friday the 13th game, I played a few rounds of it. A friend had it, and I played his copy. We went through a few rounds. I didn't really understand the appeal of it, to be honest, and I think that extends to the entire asymmetrical multiplayer thing. I'm not big for the online multiplayer stuff in general, but especially the asymmetrical style. I've tried a few of them, and I don't really see the appeal. Dead by Daylight, it's pretty much the exact same game as Friday the 13th. You could probably even play as Jason Voorhees in that game. And that 7 Days to Die game, I think, is the same, unless I'm just confusing it with Dead by Daylight again. There's also the Predator one, which was an asymmetrical thing, and there's a new Texas Chainsaw Massacre one, which I haven't played, and I love the movie. It's my favorite horror movie ever, and I have no interest in that game because the whole asymmetrical multiplayer thing just does not appeal to me at all. I think that style is just not for me. Okay, Metro Last Light versus The Evil Within 2. I like Metro Last Light a whole lot, but The Evil Within 2 is easily moving on. The Evil Within 2, it might be a dark horse contender to go real deep in this tournament because I adore this game. I might make a dedicated video about it on the Brickwall Pictures channel at some point because I love this game so much and I think it deserves more credit. Okay, Dead Space versus Resident Evil Outbreak. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't like Dead Space as much as a lot of people. I think the first Dead Space has a lot of problems that people just ignore. I think it's really repetitive. I think it's good for an hour or two, and then it just does everything over and over and over again and stops being scary and starts being tedious and monotonous while there's still 3/4 of the game to go. That's my problem with Dead Space. I think it looks great, even the old version. I haven't played the remake. I might eventually play the remake. I heard it was good. Honestly, the first one still looks really good and still handles really good. It's more just the design of it that I think got tiring and monotonous before the end, and I don't think they really changed that in the remake. So Resident Evil Outbreak is not a great Resident Evil game. I had the PS2 version of it. I was never able to reach the end because my copy always froze at a certain point, and it would just bug out and not let me finish. And I remember I even returned my copy to GameStop to get a different copy, and it also froze at the exact same spot. So I don't know if it was just a game-breaking bug versus, what I had thought was a scratch on the disc or something. But yeah, I was never able to reach the end. But it wasn't very good anyway. It was interesting in that it took kind of an anthology approach where it was the outbreak happening in different locations, and there's different characters to pick from and stuff that each have their own little ability. There's some cool stuff in there as far as the old school Resident Evil style went. I think if they remade these ones, they could really improve it and make them into something special. The first Dead Space, for all my qualms with it, is still better than Resident Evil Outbreak. Okay, Resident Evil 0 versus Run Like Hell. Run Like Hell's not good at all. It was super expensive, and they got a high-level voice cast and all that, and it was all squandered on a bunch of nonsense and bad game design. Resident Evil 0 is not one of the best Resident Evil games, but it's better than Run Like Hell, which kind of sucks. Okay, Signalis versus Condemned Bloodshot. This is a tough one. Or not a tough one, it's an interesting one. Signalis or Signalis? I don't know, is it Signalis or Signalis? Whatever. Signalis, I have not finished yet. I'm currently playing through it at the same time as Amnesia, The Bunker. Those are my 2 horror games that I'm going through, and then I will be getting right into Resident Evil 4. But I've played quite a bit of Signalis, and my opinion on it might shift once I've finished it. I've played quite a bit. I would estimate that I'm halfway through, but I don't know exactly. But I've gone pretty deep. I especially love the puzzles in this. Weirdly enough, the puzzles feel deeper and more thought out and more like complicated in a good way than a lot of survival horror games do. Whereas a lot of them are like, find the thing that goes in the thing and find the piece that goes in the piece, and they need some little bit of moon logic sometimes, especially the older ones. Signalis' puzzles are like, you need to use like deductive reasoning and like have like a piece of like a pad and like a pen and paper with you to like take notes and write down codes and stuff, and you got to like really figure stuff out. I really love the puzzle designs in this. I wouldn't say it's been like particularly scary so far in the first half. Maybe it'll change, but good sound design, great atmosphere, and I've been enjoying exploring the locations and whatnot, and the puzzles are a lot of fun. I like the retro aesthetic too. It's got the old school art style, but in a way that still feels very much intentional. I like how much variety there is too. This game is shaking things up constantly. Like, if you feel like you have your bearings, turns on a dime, it changes things. Condemned Bloodshot, however, is a favorite of mine that I've returned to many times, by the same team that made Fear. I think they're called Monolith. I don't know if they're still called Monolith. I feel like that studio might have shut down. The thing with this is Condemned Bloodshot. I love this game, and I've never been able to play the original because I never had access to it. I had the original on PS3, and the original was not released on PS3 or PS2 or whatever. I think it was an Xbox exclusive, the first one. Or maybe I just couldn't find it, and copies were like always rare or expensive or whatever. I want to someday. I think the first one's called Condemned Criminal Origins or something like that. But I've heard it's even better. The thing with Condemned Bloodshot is it's phenomenal until like right before the end when it gets really stupid. They give you, I guess spoiler alert, but I'm spoiling like the thing that kind of ruins it. So I actually think it might be better to know this is coming up and like brace yourself for it. But they give you like a sonic boom voice at the end. And it's so dumb. It's such a dumb brain jump the shark moment. But the game is phenomenal up until then. The environmental design is so perfectly creepy and atmospheric. And there's a ton of variety. So like the combat's really good. I especially like the shooting feels so tight and responsive like the Fear games. But they keep it creepy by giving you such a small amount of ammunition. You pretty much only ever have the amount of bullets that come in the gun, which means if you pick up like a double barrel shotgun, you only get 2 shots. And that's probably the only gun in the entire level. And the levels are big and sprawling and complicated. There's lots of enemies in them. Most of your combat's going to be done with melee weapons, and there's a really good melee weapon combat system. Lots of fun to play, and it doesn't stop the enemies from being like creepy or frightening or whatever. There's a whole section where like the big threat is that you are running from this crazy rabid bear that is constantly like busting through walls and stuff. That's a moment that like could have gone over the top, like the sonic boom voice, but I think it's like just within the boundaries, and I love that whole level. It's like it's so intense and like difficult too. Just really good stuff. I love that game. I've replayed it so many times. To be fair, I do usually stop playing before the level where they give you the sonic boom voice. I usually play until the bear part, because I think right after that's when the game gets really stupid. The last couple levels are just kind of dumb. But it's really good. I'm going to give it the edge here. Maybe when I finish Signalis, I'll feel differently, but I don't know. I have a soft spot for Condemned. I have a little nostalgia for it, which I will acknowledge. Deadly Premonition versus House of the Dead 3. House of the Dead 3, again, it's another rail shooter. It's another one that you can find in the arcades with the light gun attachments and all that. It's fun, but it's not really like an effective, scary game or whatever. Deadly Premonition, I don't really think is either. This game has such a loyal but like small cult following, and I can understand why. The thing is, I feel like a lot of Twin Peaks fans love it. It's very much like, it feels like Twin Peaks fan fiction, but in a way that it doesn't actually work for me. As a massive Twin Peaks fan, it just feels like, why would I play this and experience this like much worse written and acted and presented version of someone trying to knock off Twin Peaks? It doesn't really work for me. That being said, it is very original as far as the video game world is concerned. It's not at all original because it just rips everything from Twin Peaks. I mean, even then, it is still creating its own like lore. It is doing some original things, but like, it's just cribbing Twin Peaks too hard and not executing it well. If they cribbed Twin Peaks and like nailed it, I'd love it, but I don't think they do. Also, like, just the gameplay sucks. Even in like the remastered version, I played both versions, the original and the like director's cut or whatever that's supposed to fix it. The gameplay sucks. The map is so empty and such a chore to traverse. The gunplay sucks ass. Yeah, I'd still say it's more worth experiencing than House of the Dead 3. So it'll move past this round, but I don't think it'll go any further. Okay, Extermination versus Fear 2. It's Fear 2. Extermination's not good. Moving on. Okay, Alone in the Dark. Actually, you know what is interesting? I think Extermination was the first game made by the guy who made Deadly Premonition, weirdly enough. Okay, Alone in the Dark versus Dying Light. This is specifically the 2008 Alone in the Dark, which was supposed to be like a reboot. I've never played the originals, and I'm not really like able to. I think you need a PC to be able to play them, which I do not have a PC. I'm a Mac user. I think they're remaking the original Alone in the Dark, which I will definitely be checking out. The rebooted one in 2008 is real bad. It's so awful. Dying Light's moving on. Fear versus Silent Hill 3. Now, this is the last of the Silent Hills that I've played. I have not played Silent Hill 4, though I am looking forward to at some point. And I haven't played any of the ones after that, which is, I heard most of them are bad. But I would still try them. I just haven't played those ones. It's the first 3 that I've played, and I enjoyed all 3 of them. But I definitely go for Fear. Fear, I love Fear. I've played through it so many times. I think it's got such good shootouts and like the best shootout AI somehow still for the enemies. And outside of the combat, genuinely good horror stuff. Like Alma is such an iconic horror game villain. House of the Dead 2 versus Resident Evil Revelations. House of the Dead 2 is one of the best of the like arcadey House of the Deads. It's still, Resident Evil Revelations isn't that great either. It's kind of like a spin-off. Revelations, I think, was like a DS exclusive at some point, but then they eventually brought it over to PlayStation 3, which is where I played it. It's okay. It's better than like Resident Evil 6. It's maybe on par with 5, but it's not, I don't know, maybe not. It's sort of in that territory. It's much worse than like 4 or like the 2 remake or 7 or 8. It's still probably better than House of the Dead 2, though. Okay, that is all the games. That took forever, but now we're into the next round. Okay, Get Even versus Evil Within. It's easily the Evil Within. Like I said, Get Even was lucky to make it through that first round. Okay, Manhunt versus Prey. This is an interesting one. I think Prey is technically a better game. It's hard to compare because it's like 2 generations later, basically. Manhunt is more of a full-blooded horror game. Prey is an immersive sim, first and foremost, I would say. And it's got lots of like sci-fi and action components. It's going to be Manhunt, moving on. Okay, Silent Hill, the original, versus Outlast. The Silent Hill games, those 3 old ones, are games that I respect a lot more than I actively enjoy playing. Like, I find they handle not great. Some of the puzzles are a little ridiculous, like the moon logic stuff I'm not a fan of. Versus Outlast is definitely best when you play it yourself. It can be really intense. Okay, ZombieU versus Scorn. It's going to be Scorn moving forward. Like I said, ZombieU, pretty lucky to move forward because it was paired up against that dog shit Until Dawn. I'll talk more about Scorn later on. I said that last time, but I'll still do it. I'll do it when it's a tough matchup. Okay, Resident Evil 4 versus Resident Evil. It is easily Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 2 Remake versus Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. It's the Resident Evil 2 Remake. Again, the Undead Nightmare, it's kind of not a full game, so it's a little unfair to compare. Little Nightmares versus Dead Rising. Little Nightmares is okay. I haven't played the sequel yet. Or both sequels? Are there 3 of them yet? I'm not sure. But I haven't played this. I've only played the first one. I thought it was pretty good, but I don't know. It was a little repetitive. It's a pretty short game, but I also thought it kind of, I don't know, I honestly kind of outstayed its welcome a little bit, even though it is really short. It kind of felt like it was running through the same bag of tricks a couple times in a row there, so I think I'm going to go Dead Rising. Dead Space 2 versus Manhunt 2. I think I'm going to go Manhunt 2. I have a soft spot for that series. I'm sure I like the Manhunt games more than a lot of people. Maybe you disagree with me on the Manhunt games, or you're just a big fan of Dead Space 2. I do like Dead Space 2. Like I said, better than the first game. Outlast 2 versus Metro 2033. It's going to be Outlast 2. Resident Evil 7 versus Resident Evil 8. Now, this is an interesting one. This is probably going to be divisive. I have a clear favorite here, and it's Resident Evil 8. I think a lot of people would probably go 7. I think 7 was got better reviews and whatnot, and is generally the one that the fans of the series prefer. I prefer 8 by a large margin. By a large margin. I like 7 a lot, but 8 I think is is better. And again, like they both devolve into schlock in their latter halves, or at least in their latter thirds. But pretty much every game in the Resident Evil series does. And 8 is better when it's at its peak. Plus, that like baby thing in the dollhouse level, that is like the creepiest thing in any of the Resident Evil games. Okay, House of the Dead Overkill versus Revelations 2. It's going to be House of the Dead Overkill. I can finally talk about Overkill. I didn't actually really cover it in the first round. Overkill is the best House of the Dead game by far, and it's for one simple reason. This game has personality. The other House of the Dead games don't have personality other than being like cringy, like some of the worst voice acting you will ever hear is in those early House of the Dead games. Overkill, however, has good voice acting, has a great sense of humor, and a wonderful grindhouse aesthetic, like the Tarantino Rodriguez, like grindhouse pastiche aesthetic, not like actual grindhouse aesthetic, but that like phony throwback grindhouse aesthetic. And they nail it. It's so much fun. They pair up a stuffy FBI agent, I think his name is G-Man, versus something Washington is the guy. He's like the tough New York cop or whatever, paired with the FBI stuffy guy. They're like the classic buddy cop duo. They got a lot of good humor out of that. The characters are all really fun. The villain's fun too. Also, the soundtrack kicks ass. Such a good fucking soundtrack for that game. They went so much harder on that soundtrack than they needed to. Really great, really memorable soundtrack that's also quite different from most other video games. Lots of like old school funk and like new score that blends like horror with like groovier tunes than you often get. Really good stuff. Again, it's just like a rail shooter, you know. The gameplay is very simplistic, but it's all about the personality and the style of this one. I'm glad that I got to move Darkwood through at least one round because it is quite good, especially for like a pretty small indie game. But Evil Within 2 is moving on. Dead Space versus Resident Evil 0. I'm surprised that Dead Space is moving farther than Dead Space 2, even though I think the second one is better. Dead Space is just getting lucky with these matchups because it's better than Resident Evil 0. That game's quite forgettable. Okay, Condemned Bloodshot versus Deadly Premonition. No surprise here, it's Condemned Bloodshot. Let's move on. Fear 2 versus Dying Light. Fear 2 all the way. And Fear versus Resident Evil Revelations. Fear all the way. Evil Within versus Manhunt. I think the first Evil Within versus the first Manhunt. I think I go Manhunt. Manhunt, by the way, another horror game with a killer soundtrack. There's a very clear, like, John Carpenter influence. Really good stuff. Okay, Outlast versus Scorn. Now, this is a tough one, and this is where I will finally talk a little bit more about Scorn. So Scorn is recent. It's new. It hit Game Pass, so you might have heard about it. Scorn is really tough to evaluate because it's a mixed bag where the highs are astronomical, but the lows are like beyond frustrating. It's a game that is all about its art design. That is its strong suit, is its art design. It's an H.R. Giger inspired world with lots of Cronenberg influence too, and there's another artist too. It's like a mashup of Giger and this other artist whose name is escaping me, but I'll put it on screen if I think of it in the edit. And but with a strong Cronenberg body horror influence as well. The art design is unbelievably good. Incredible stuff. Really grotesque body horror. Amazing world to walk around in and explore. Where the game falls to pieces is in the actual gameplay, though. And it's so disappointing. Because if this game just had good combat and good puzzles, it would be like one of my favorite games in recent years. That's how fucking great the art direction is. But the gameplay is so bad. It's so frustratingly bad. First off, the puzzles suck. They're tedious. They're not good at all. Second, the combat. They might as well have just not put the combat in the game if they were going to put such little effort into it. They put effort into like designing the weapons. The guns are like, speaking of Cronenberg, like existenz, right? They're like fleshy, like biological weapons where you like load them with like pieces of like teeth or your own body or whatever. They don't really explain what the things are, but they're clearly not like bullets. Like the gun's like attached to you and it plugs into you and stuff. It's great. Again, the design, phenomenal. But the actual combat is like unplayable at points. You really need to like cheese your way through the game. You need to like exploit glitches to get through it because they just did not calibrate the enemies and your damage output correctly. It's like impossible to play. And this isn't an Alien Isolation thing where I'm just bad at it. It's like widespread known that the combat is awful. Now I did play it right when it came out. I don't know if they've like patched the game and updated it and like calibrated things differently. Maybe they have. I hope they have. But at least at release, the combat was like unplayable. I was only able to get through certain sections of this by like forcing glitches because like they straight up do not give you enough ammo. You collect every single shot in the game, it's not enough. The enemies kill you so fast, and they made them way too accurate. They gave these enemies projectiles. They will shoot where you're going, like they lead their targets, and you'll either walk into it, or if you stop in time, the projectile will just hit you anyway. It's crazy. It's like impossible to avoid getting hit unless you like cheese it, or you play in a really ridiculous way where you gotta like run way, way, way far away out of their range and backtrack all this crazy distance. So the gameplay side of things really lets Scorn down. That is why Outlast is going to move ahead. But Scorn, for as frustrating as it is still worth experiencing. Honestly, it's another one of those games where I might suggest just watching like a walkthrough of it or something so that you don't have to experience the frustrations of the combat and the puzzles. The puzzles aren't as frustrating, but they're just really bland and tedious. They're pretty easy, actually. They take a long time, and they're not engaging. Okay, Resident Evil 4 versus Resident Evil 2. It would make sense to compare both remakes, but like I said, I haven't played the 4 remake yet. I am saving it as a little treat for myself this October. That being said, even the original version, the old PS2 version, I guess the original version would be the GameCube version. I think that came first. The version I always played was the PS2 version. I've played through this game more times than any other game. Every moment of that game is ingrained in my memory. It's moving on. I think it's the better game anyway. Okay, Dead Rising versus Manhunt 2. I'm going to go Manhunt 2. The Manhunt, I'm representing the Manhunt fandom, if there's any out there other than me. Okay, Outlast 2 versus Resident Evil 8. This is kind of tough. Resident Evil 8, I think, is fantastic when it's in its sweet spot, but it gets so stupid by the end. Also, I have to say, the main character sucks. Same character from Resident Evil 7. He was bad then, but he's so much worse in Resident Evil 8. He's so annoying. Like everything he says, the way he behaves, it's so annoying. I'm a fan of when you have a protagonist who talks as opposed to the silent protagonist shtick. I'm not a fan of the silent protagonist shtick. Ethan Winters is one instance where I would definitely prefer a silent protagonist because he is so annoying. Oh, I think I'm still going to go Resident Evil 8, though, at the end of the day. Because when it does right, it does really, really well. I do like Outlast 2 a whole lot, though. I think I've stuck up for it enough. I like it more than a lot of people seem to. House of the Dead Overkill versus Evil Within 2. Overkill had a good run, but it's Evil Within 2 moving forward. Okay, Dead Space versus Condemned Bloodshot. Dead Space, your run comes to an end right here. Condemned Bloodshot is moving on. Oh, okay, now. Fear 2 versus Fear. Now, I love both these games. I think they're both great. Usually I don't play one without playing the other. They're kind of a package deal. The thing with Fear 1, every time I go back to Fear 1, and I'm sure this is a common occurrence, it takes a while to like relearn the game because while Fear 2 plays very much like how lots of other shooters of the time and today play, like the controls and whatnot, the first Fear doesn't. It feels quite different. Like the way you aim, the way you like zoom in and stuff, the way the like grenades are mapped, like the button mapping's all different. And it also just like plays a little differently. You have to like readjust to it. But once you are adjusted to it, it's fantastic. I think it has the better like weapons, like that feel a little better once you're used to them. Like the shotgun is way better in this one than Fear 2. The shotgun got worse in every Fear game. Like the shotgun in Fear 3 sucks. Shotgun in Fear 2 is pretty good, but the shotgun in Fear 1 is like one of the most overpowered shotguns ever, and I love it. Like, that's a good thing in this instance. Oh man, I want to replay Fear right now. I think I'm going to go Fear 1. But Fear 2, really great stuff as well. Really great ending to Fear 2 as well, that then got squandered in Fear 3. I mean, they tried to further it in Fear 3. They just kind of missed the mark. We are now in the quarterfinals. Manhunt versus Outlast. Outlast is the game that's more likely to, like, actively scare you. I think Manhunt has more to say, though, but everything it's saying is very much, like, below the surface, very understated. And you can easily just get lost in how gratuitous it is and, like, get lost in the grime. There are also some areas where it hasn't aged super well. But, the Pigsy fight alone, I think, is what I'm going to give it the edge to Manhunt for the Pigsy boss fight, because that shit is so good. I feel like the Pigsy boss fight encapsulates everything that's great about Outlast into one boss fight, and then you have the rest of the game around it. Like, that Pigsy boss fight is basically a microcosm of the entirety of Outlast, where you're in a location trapped with a big fucker who can, like, instantly kill you, and you're basically defenseless against. I think I just convinced myself, based on the strengths of the Pigsy boss fight, to give it to Manhunt. I wasn't expecting Manhunt to go this far, I'll be honest. I wasn't expecting Manhunt to make it to the semifinals, but it's there. Okay, Resident Evil 4 versus Manhunt 2. It's going to be Resident Evil 4. We're not going to have an all Manhunt semifinals. Okay, Resident Evil 8 versus Evil Within 2. It's going to be the Evil Within 2. Moving on. Okay, Condemned Bloodshot versus Fear. This is 2 by the same studio. But it's a pretty easy one. It's got to be Fear because it doesn't have the dumb brain Sonic Boom jump the shark stuff. So it's Fear. Okay, and we are in the semifinals. We are near the end here, and I am liking these final 4. Manhunt versus Resident Evil 4. Manhunt had a great run, but it's got to be Resident Evil 4. This is a tougher matchup than the other semifinals. Evil Within 2 versus Fear. One's a classic. The other, I think, should be hailed as a classic, but I don't think it is. It's still relatively recent. The Evil Within 2, I feel like didn't get as much love as I think it deserves, which is why I think I might make a video about it. I've replayed Fear so many times. I've also played through the Evil Within 2 3 times, and it only came out a few years ago. And just for context, I'm not someone who replays games all that often. I'm actually someone who often struggles to finish games. I start them and I enjoy them, and then I move on to other stuff. Like, I don't stick with them. So it says a lot when I replay through an entire game. And both of these I've replayed through multiple times. The Evil Within 2 has the extra replayability of, like, the open world component and the resource gathering, the New Game Plus feature, which isn't a thing in Fear and wouldn't really make sense for it to be in Fear. And also it has, they added a free update where you can play the game in third person or now in first person, which is awesome. And it kind of, like, completely changes the game, like how you approach, like, stealth and whatnot. And it works really well both ways. It's, like, creepy in different ways. In this moment, I'm feeling Evil Within 2. I really love this game. I'm going Evil Within 2, which means that our final matchup is Resident Evil 4 versus Evil Within 2, which I think are both game directed by the same dude, who I am now concluding is the best horror game director or game designer or whoever, head of whatever the fuck. Right off the bat, I think I have to go Resident Evil 4. And keep in mind, I'm not even talking about the remake, which I've been hearing people saying is better, which I can't even believe, because that's how good the original version is. If the remake really is better, then holy shit, it's got to be on its own plane of existence. Yeah, I'm satisfied with this outcome. Resident Evil 4, greatest horror game of all time. Here we go. Okay, go play Resident Evil 4. I guess play the remake or whatever, but you can also go back and play the original and know that it will be a great fucking time. You'll have a good ass time if you like horror games. And Evil Within 2, if you overlooked it, go check it out. You don't need to play the first one first, but you can. They're very different. They're like completely different games. There's similar DNA, but they're very different, and you can jump right into 2. You don't need to have played the first one. Anyway, thanks for joining me on this horror video game tournament. Again, you can check out my horror novel, South of the Mason-Dixon, if you're looking for something to read this spooky season. And make sure you subscribe to Brickwall Unplugged for more horror tournaments this October, and just for, other movie content the rest of the year, other movie tournaments, tier lists, all kinds of stuff. Stick around. I'll see you next time. So long.